All right, everyone. So, all of the fog of the horror from the massacre that took place in Israel has dissipated, and so the flame wars are here. The online war between people who are pro Hamas and pro Israel is taking place as I speak on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, whatever, all throughout the internet. There is this war. And you have people who love Hamas, who love Gaza. And you know what's so, to me, what's so weird and just disturbing and warped is you have these people who come along and they're saying, free Gaza, free Palestine, and they will portray Hamas like they're freedom fighters, when the reality is that they're bloodthirsty terrorists. They're ISIS. But they'll say, oh yes, free Gaza, free Hamas. And they'll sit there and act like, they're not going to express any support for Israel because they're not going to, jump on the Zionist bandwagon. Or you have people who try to come across as though they're neutral. And they'll say, well, I'm not going to pick any side here because both sides are evil and they're wrong because, Israel is bombing civilian infrastructure right now, so they're also bad. Yeah, but, well, I just don't see how this argument makes any sense because Israel is bombing Gaza because Gaza is ruled and controlled by Hamas, and Hamas slaughtered tons of Israeli civilians. Slaughtered them in mass shootings with rockets. Launching thousands of rockets into Israel, doing multiple mass shootings, raping Israeli women. Yes, Hamas did this. Hamas is ISIS. It's ISIS. And Israel has a neighbor called Gaza, which is controlled by an organization that is just like ISIS. And we're supposed to sit here and say, well, oh yes, I'm not going to pick a side here. But why is Israel bombing Gaza? It's because Gaza is controlled by a terrorist organization. So we can't sit here and act like, well, I'm not going to pick any sides here. I'm not going to sit here and say, well, I support Israel in bombing Gaza because both are evil. They're both evil. This is a huge cop-out. It's just a cop-out. The people who criticize Israel on the internet, in many cases, are the same people who support Bashar al-Assad. People who support Assad, people who support Putin, I want to say they tend to be people who are against Israel, but every single time I've seen these people, they're always against Israel, right? They're always critical of Israel. They're always against Zionism. And there's nothing wrong with being critical of Israel. No nation is exempt from criticism. No nation should have a shield protecting it from criticism, right? If a nation does wrong, they should be criticized for it. End of story. But they'll sit there and they're just against Israel no matter what. But they'll support Bashar al-Assad and they'll support Putin. And they will support Russia's war against Ukraine. But then they'll bash Israel for bombing Gaza. Well, there's a double standard going on here. Because these people, when they say they support Assad, they'll say, well, Assad is fighting terrorists. And I will look to them and say, I agree. Assad has been fighting terrorists for over a decade. The rebels, backed by the CIA, backed by NATO, and the people who are the people who support Assad, they're very critical of NATO, and they'll say, well, yes, the CIA is backing the rebels, and Bashar al-Assad is fighting against the NATOist American imperialists. And I'll say, yes, okay, we have common ground here. CIA-backed rebels, yes, that's true. Bashar al-Assad is fighting those rebel terrorists, and he has every right to fight those terrorists. Absolutely. Absolutely. But then these very people will bash Israel for doing the same thing. I mean, who is Putin fighting? Who is Netanyahu fighting here? Netanyahu is fighting terrorists. People who would not hesitate to butcher and rape just as they did days ago. Days ago. And what this massacre shows is that any opportunity these terrorists have to slaughter Jewish people as if they're cattle and rape Jewish women, they will take it. They will take that opportunity. Any gap. They are like a virus. Any gap in your immune system, the virus will go through it to try to destroy your body. And, you know, you can say, well, Israel allowed for this terrorist attack to happen. Israel allowed for the gap to be there. And more than likely, sorry, I moved the mic here. More than likely, you're correct, right? I mean, I find it very hard to believe, and I did a video about this yesterday. I find it very hard to believe that the second most sophisticated intelligence network in the world, which is Israeli intelligence, couldn't detect that this was happening. Israel had this, super high-tech fence with motion sensors on it, very sensitive motion sensors on it that could detect a mouse going past it, and yet Israel's security system couldn't see that there were people, breaking through the fence, that there was a guy on a bulldozer hitting the fence, that they used a Bangalore torpedo to blow up the fence and make a gap and penetrate the barrier. They couldn't see that people were literally cutting the fence. I find it hard to believe that this is all just a coincidence, and Israel had a huge intelligence blunder, right? That's the official narrative right now, or that's the mainstream narrative, at least, that there was a huge intelligence blunder. I just find all that hard to believe. But even if this is all true, right, that Israel allowed for this to happen, it still does not take away from the fact that those terrorists committed those horrendous crimes. They did so under the watch of Israel, let's say, right, hypothetically speaking. Let's say they did all these crimes under the watch of Israel. They did all these crimes because they were enabled by Israel being purposefully negligent about their security. They still did those crimes. They still committed those rapes. They still kidnapped those people. They still executed civilians in mass shootings. They still launched thousands of rockets. They did all these things. They did it because they wanted to do these crimes. And why did they want to do these crimes? Why do they want to do these crimes? Because they still want to commit these crimes. It's because of Islam. And as long as Islam is there, you're going to have this problem, because Islam teaches that the Jews are infidels, that the Christians are infidels, and that it is an obligation of the Muslim to fight against the infidels. And that's the bottom line. It has nothing to do with land. They say, it has to do with land. Turkey comes along and says, well, we need a two-state solution. And this is the mainstream narrative, that there needs to be a two-state solution. And, there's this idea that Israel should carve out this state for the Palestinians and give East Jerusalem to the Palestinians to be their capital. And then let's say this happens, right? Let's say that Israel makes this, supports the creation of a Palestinian state, and they give East Jerusalem away. What's going to happen? What? All the people who support this idea, tell me, what do you think will happen if this idea is brought to fruition and it's done? What do you think is going to happen? I want to know what you think will happen. Do you really believe that all these terrorists are going to say, oh, yes, everything is fine, and they're going to sing Hava Lida Hava, and they're all going to watch Fiddler in the Roof, and they're going to watch Schindler's List with their Israeli friends? Do you really think that's going to happen? Do you really think there's going to be serious peace? As long as the ideology of Islam is there, you're going to have problems. That's it. Bottom line. Bottom line. And people are, it's so weird to me. You read these stories of executions, mass shootings, thousands of rockets launched into Israel, people being kidnapped, freaking terrorists, these sadistic bastards going into some guy's home and shooting his dog. There's a video of it. You can see it online. Some Hamas terrorist killing a dog. The dog walks up to the terrorist all excited, wagging its tail, and this bastard shoots this dog. I mean, it's sick. It really is. It's sickening. And I saw this photo of a group of Israeli people, elderly people, at a bus stop, dead, bullet holes in their heads, blood everywhere. It's horrific. It's horrific. But then you have people who go on Twitter and they're like, free Palestine, Gaza, gotta help the Gaza, because they know Israel is bombing civilian infrastructure. And these people who do these kinds of posts, they tend to be people who are very critical of NATO, and they will support Bashar al-Assad. Not all of them, but a lot of them do. And the reality is that Bashar al-Assad did the same thing that Netanyahu's doing right now. Bashar al-Assad bombed civilian infrastructure to fight terrorists. And he killed terrorists, be they FSA, al-Nusra, ISIS. Bashar al-Assad, his regime, with the help of Russia, fought against terrorists. And I always supported Bashar al-Assad. Always. If you don't believe me, you can go to my website, shootbot.com. Look at all my posts on Bashar al-Assad, going all the way back to 2011. I think that's how far back I was writing about this, about the subject of Syria. You can see I was always supporting Bashar al-Assad, always against the rebels. Why? Because those rebels that Bashar al-Assad was fighting and is still fighting, to some extent, are bastards. Those rebels were bastards, and there are bastards. They are people who rape, they behead, they do human trafficking. They're just sons of bitches. They're awful people. They behead people. I mean, they're sick bastards. They are sick bastards. And if you have enough of these people in your country, you will have to go to war with them. You have to go to war with them because they're going to overthrow you. They're going to rape your wife. They're going to cut your head off. And they're going to rape your wife and force you to watch. That's the type of stuff that these people do. That's what they do, these people. They rape your wife. They force you to watch. I mean, they're sick bastards, okay? Sick bastards. So they're in the civilian infrastructure. What are you going to do? You have to go to war with them. So I always supported Bashar al-Assad, and I still support Bashar al-Assad. And the people online who support Bashar al-Assad, they'll say, oh, NATO bad, Zionism bad, Syria, we support Bashar al-Assad, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, yeah, okay, I support Bashar al-Assad too. He's fighting terrorists. But then they'll bash Israel. What's Israel doing? Israel is fighting Hamas. Hamas is a terrorist organization, just like the FSA were terrorists, just like ISIS are terrorists, just like al-Nusra are terrorists. Terrorism has to be obliterated, bottom line. It has to be, you got to destroy it. End of story. You have to destroy it. And the people who are critical of Israel, or you know what, I'll put it in a different way, because just because people are critical of Israel doesn't mean they're automatically going to be supporters of Russia. People who, in the West, people in America and Europe who support Putin and they support Assad, every time I've seen these people, they have always been people who are critical of Israel. So they will support Putin's war against Ukraine, and they'll say, well, Putin is fighting against Ukra-Nazis. That's a term that they like to use, right? Ukrainian neo-Nazis. Putin is fighting the Ukrainian Nazis. And I'll say, yeah, you're right. There's a lot of Nazis in Ukraine. There is. Don't make any mistake about it. There's a lot of Nazis there. In Kiev, they had a street that was named after some Russian guy who lived in the 1800s. I think he was a physicist of some sort. And he wasn't an evil person, wasn't a murderer. He was just a Russian physicist. And the Ukrainians didn't like the fact that they had a street in Kiev named after a Russian. So they said, okay, we're going to change the name. Let's put it to a vote. Let's allow the people to vote for whose name should this street be named after. And the majority of the people who voted in favor of replacing the Russian guy's name with the name of a Ukrainian Nazi. His last name was Kubuyovich. And Kubuyovich. And Kubuyovich was a Ukrainian Nazi who collaborated with the Germans. And he was a Nazi. He hated the Jews. He wanted to kill Jews, the whole thing. And the Ukrainians in Kiev, the majority of the Ukrainians in Kiev who voted on renaming the street said, yeah, this guy is Russian. We don't want his name on a street in Kiev. Get rid of the name and replace his name with the name of a Nazi. Well, what does that tell you about Kiev? What does that tell you about Kiev? Or if you look at the Euromaidan, Andrei Porubi was one of the leaders. In fact, he was the commandant for the Euromaidan movement. If you look him up, the guy is a Nazi. He's an ultra-nationalist Ukrainian. He's a Ukrainian ultra-nationalist. These are the types of people that are in Ukraine. There's a lot of them in Ukraine. And so the Russian government has been fighting a lot of these Nazis. All of these Ukrainian Nazis, because the Ukrainian Nazis are against Russia. And so the people who are more sympathetic to Russia, they'll say, well, Ukraine has a lot of Nazis, and they were violent against the ethnic Russians in eastern Ukraine, and Putin wants to protect his people against these ultra-nationalists, et cetera, et cetera. And I'll say, okay, yeah, I agree with you. So you will support Putin's war against Ukrainian fascists, against Ukrainian Nazis, but you will automatically condemn the Israeli government for fighting against Hamas. How the hell does that make any sense? There's a double standard going on here, and that's the problem that I've noticed. For example, there is a video that you can watch that came out today on Twitter from Sydney, Australia, in which you can see people who are pro-Palestine, and these people are, listen, I'm looking at the crowd here. I'm not seeing any Australian-looking people. I'm not seeing any Kiwis walking around. It's a bunch of Middle Eastern people in Australia, okay? This is not Steve Irwin saying Allahu Akbar. But anyway, they're in this assembly in Sydney. I think they're near that big ass opera house they have over there, and they're screaming, "Gas the Jews!" They're literally screaming, "Gas the Jews!" This is a reference to the Holocaust. When people who hate Jews online will say things like this. They'll say, gas them, blah, blah, blah. It's a very, very sick thing to say. But these Muslim Palestinians in Australia are saying gas the Jews alongside Takbir and Allahu Akbar. These are Nazis. These are Palestinian neo-Nazis. I know when we think of neo-Nazi, we think of like a white guy either in Alabama or maybe he's in Germany or something, and he's covered in tattoos and he's drinking beer and he hates the Jews. And that's a form of a neo-Nazi. There's different variants of neo-Nazi, but there's also a Middle Eastern variant of neo-Nazi, and these exist. In fact, I would argue that the Palestinians were alt-right before the word alt-right was even invented. So, for example, you have people on the far right who will say things like, the biggest mistake that Hitler did was not finishing the job. My father will tell you that when he was growing up in the West Bank back in the 70s, that people were saying things like that in the West Bank, that the biggest thing that the biggest problem that they had with Hitler was that he didn't finish the job. So the Palestinians were far right Nazis before the idea of being far right became trendy in the Western world, with phenomena like the alt-right and the like. And so these are Palestinian neo-Nazis. And people in Gaza, people in the West Bank, a lot of them will admire Adolf Hitler because Adolf Hitler killed the Jews. And after the Holocaust, a lot of the Jews would go to Israel, what was known as Palestine at the time, and the people who lived there, a lot of them hated this. They hated this. So the Palestinians are mad that Hitler didn't finish the job, because if Hitler had finished the job, then there would be no Jews in Israel today. So these are Palestinian neo-Nazis. And Netanyahu and everyone who supports Netanyahu will tell you that these Palestinians are basically Nazis. They will also tell you that they are ISIS, and they would be right, but they're also Nazis. So if Putin is right in invading Ukraine, bombing Ukraine because he's fighting Ukrainian Nazis, then the people who support Putin should also support the Israeli government for fighting against Hamas. I'm not saying that they should support Israel just indiscriminately because because they for no reason, right? I'm not saying that they should support Israel just for the sake of supporting Israel. I'm talking about this specific conflict against Hamas. If you support Russia's war against Ukrainian Nazis, then you should also support Israel's war against Palestinian terrorists, because the Palestinian terrorists and Azov are the same damn thing. They're the same thing. They're the same damn thing. If Azov had the chance to exterminate all the Russians, the Azov fighters would do it. If they could repeat what they did to the Polish people, they would do it. Same thing with the Palestinian terrorists. Any opportunity, any chance they get to slaughter Jews, they take it. And that is evident in what we just saw recently in Israel. Dandelion root tea. Tastes like coffee. It's coffee without the caffeine. Anyway, so this is the double standard that I've noticed, right? This is the double standard that I've noticed. So I follow people on Twitter who are sympathetic to Assad and sympathetic to Russia. And now I'm seeing these very people saying, oh, yes, liberate Palestine, down with Israel, blah, blah, blah. It's like, whoa, hold on. I've been seeing you guys for years supporting Bashar al-Assad and supporting Putin. For years, you guys supported Bashar al-Assad because Assad was fighting terrorists in the Syrian civil war. I agree with you. That's why I started following your pages. You know, I'm not saying Assad is great, and I hate that I have to say that. I hate that I have to say I'm not saying Assad is great, as if just because I support a policy of a particular leader, that means I automatically support everything about the person. No, I support Bashar al-Assad's war against the rebels. Any leader would do exactly what Bashar al-Assad did if they were put in his position. If rebels who follow Islamic Jihad were trying to topple you and take you over, after seeing what your friend Gaddafi went through, being sodomized by a stick and shot multiple times to death, you would fight to the death against these people. And these people who support Bashar al-Assad because he fought terrorists, they will criticize Israel. Israel is fighting against Hamas. And when you look at the carnage that Hamas did recently, I mean, these people deserve to be bombed. And then you're going to argue, well, you know, Israel is hitting civilian areas, blah, blah, blah. Here is the problem with Gaza. It's the same damn problem with a lot of the Islamic world. You have an entire population of people who support terrorists. That's the problem. It's like Ukraine. You have a lot of people in Ukraine who support ultranationalism, who revere Bandera, who revere Melnik, they revere the OUN, they revere all of these Ukrainian terrorists as heroes. So in Gaza, you have an entire society of people who are schizophrenic. I mean, these people are schizophrenic. Here's the thing about these Gazan people. And this type of thing also plagues the Palestinians in the West Bank. Although I would say, I could be wrong, but I will say that Palestinians in the West Bank, I think, are a lot more civilized than people in Gaza. That's a take I'm going to make right here. With that said, the reason why I say that these people are schizophrenic is because they will commit a horrendous atrocity of mass murder and rape and kidnapping and other cruelties. And then when the response hits back at them, they'll say, we're the victims. Oh my God. This is like peak psychopathy, right? This is peak psychopath behavior. I hurt you, and then I get mad at you for responding back with violence. Right? If I smack you and you punch me in the face and I act like a victim, I'm a psychopath. That's a psychopathic thing to do. That's straight up demonic, evil, diabolical behavior right there. That's what it is. And that's what I don't like about these people. The whole society supports Hamas. And then when they see Hamas killing Israelis, they say, Allahu Akbar, Takbir, blah, 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 blah. And then when Israel bombs them, they're like, oh my God, what's going on? What did we do to deserve this? Well, you supported terrorism. That's the problem. That is the problem. And as long as people in Gaza refuse to see the spiritual cancer that is in their society, they will continue to suffer. And that's the problem. I don't want to see Gazan kids dead. I don't want to see dead baby Palestinians. Or I don't want to see that. I don't like seeing that sort of thing. But at the same time, don't be shocked when your buildings are bombed after you have voted for a terrorist organization that has slaughtered the citizens of the country that's bombing you. Don't act surprised.